I did distribute the cards that you all had written, cards of appreciation to our staff, and also to thank you all for the work you did on the sandwiches. So that's a good thing with that. Today I want to do a brief run through of the Matthew passage that we're going to do, but I want to do it in the context initially of looking at the two narratives that we have, the birth narratives that we have in the scriptures. I put together a little chart here just to give you a little idea of the differences that we find in these two perspectives. First of all, if you look at the story that we find in Luke, this is the gospel, as you remember, is the least, the last, the lost, and the lonely. This is the gospel that focuses on those who are the lower level of society, those that are marginalized in some shape or manner or way within the scripture story. And it is in that group that we have the Christmas story of the shepherds that we have. And so these are, the shepherds were just about the lowest ring you could go on the ladder. And so for that reason, we have that represented. Then we also have the story of Matthew. Matthew is written primarily for the Jewish community. So you have the Greek-speaking Gentile community as the focus of our Luke study, and then you have the Jews in the Matthew study, and we have the Magi here. These are the learned people, and so obviously the significant contrast of who the audiences are and the representation that is chosen for those. So those are the two first of all things. Then we have obviously shepherds in the field. We've already talked about them a little bit. And then we have the Magi who are coming from the east. And we're going to talk a little bit about what coming from the east means with that. You have in the Luke story, you have a stable that is the setting in which we take place. You have Herod's palace in the story of the Magi. So again, a stable. It's a place in which the animal was kept. And as Garrett mentioned a little bit, we're not totally sure what that means, other than the word that is used. The inn is not a hotel. The inn is the room in the house that is the guest room. There is no room for them in the guest room of the house. If you remember the story, the sacred family, the family is asked to go to their place of origin, and so they go to Bethlehem, and they would have gone and they would have stayed with neighbors or with relatives. And it says there's no room for them in the guest room. Well, the reason is everybody has come back to their place of origin. So just imagine everybody descending upon your house, as sometimes we do for family reunions, but they all come and they expect to be cared for. Hospitality is one of the major gifts that we find in this portion of the world. And so for that reason, when they get there, there is no room in the inn. And the place that they have available that's left is the room that would have been the stable. The room that would have been in the house where the animals that were used on day-to-day life in that culture would have been housed. And usually when you went into the house, it was the first room on the right that you would have, and that would be on the lower level, and then you would go up the levels to get into the cooler air, and also so the guest room would have been on the second floor in most instances and would have been available. It was not in the kitchen area, but it was on the second floor with that. So you have them there. So you've got the what we call the stable, and then you have Herod's palace. We also know that the little baby Jesus is in the manger, which is the feeding trough. And then when the time comes for the wise guys to show up, they find them in the house. So evidently some relatives have left. And so they now find their place in the house, at least in the words that are used in the scripture. In the Gospel of Luke, we have angels that proclaim the word, and an angel speaks to them. And then there's a whole army of angels that show up. And then you have with that the kings that are gifts for a king. So you have the gifts, and we're going to talk about those a little bit, that is for a king. You also have a star, a miraculous star that is present, and also a dream, at least one in the story of Matthew. In the Gospel of Luke, the implication is this is happening immediately. This is happening at the point that the little baby is born, at least very early on in the story. And so they have the immediacy of that. And then in Matthew, the implication is it's maybe a little later on, in that the settings are different. You also have Herod in the story talking about being interested in doing away with all the children that are 2 years and below. Why would he have picked that number if it had not had a little bit of time in the midst of that? And then the story of light. You find the light of Luke and the dark elements that we'll talk about briefly in the Gospel of Matthew. It's a different story. And in our pageantry within the church throughout history and time, we have combined these two stories into a single story. But yet it's two different gospel stories, specifically to two different cultures or target groups. But we're able to do that within the church, as when all persons coming to be a part of the church story gives us a chance to do that. So let's take a look at the scripture that we have here. Second chapter of Matthew, the first through the fourth verses on this first slide. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observe his star in its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. Now, this part of the story is interesting because, first of all, which Herod are we talking about in this story? This is Herod the Great. This is the daddy of them. Herod Antipas and Herod Philip and Herod Antipas are his children, and they are serving in governorship kinds of roles within that. You'll see that, but they are also the ones to inherit the crown as time goes on. And it talks about, in the midst of this, the focus of what the wise men are doing here is they're coming to pay homage. They're coming to worship. They're coming to praise and to give thanks for this gift that God has given to us. And so when they express that, Herod, first of all, is frightened by this. Now, he was troubled. In some translations, the word is troubled and not frightened. Anyway, Herod is feeling that this is a potential threat to him. You know, who is this child that everybody's all excited about with that? Now, interestingly, Herod is an individual that you could say the assumption was everybody was out to get me. Now, that was not unusual for a king or a leader, because how did you lose your reign? Somebody takes care of you with this. And so it is not unusual for kings that, you can't make everybody happy. And most of the time they didn't try to. And most of the time they made things very difficult for people. And for that reason, very few kings had a lot of popularity to that. So they were always concerned about who would be the next person, who would be the person that I need to keep looking over my shoulder. And Herod tended to be very paranoid. He was just convinced everybody was out to get him. And so he was troubled. He was frightened because here is another threat. Here's somebody that's going to take over my reign with that. And then all Jerusalem was frightened and troubled with him. Now, why would they be frightened? more unrest. It's one of those things. They knew Herod, and they knew Herod's reputation. Herod was paranoid. He murdered anybody that was a rival of his. He had his wife and 3 sons murdered. And so, if Herod is troubled, that's not good for us. If he is paranoid, if he is troubled, if he is frightened, we are going to reap the benefits of that. And so, in fact, it's Augustus, the ruler Augustus said of Herod is that it was better to be Herod's pig than to be his son. There's more threat if you are the son of Herod than it is if you're the banquet main course with this, because of his difficulty with that. In fact, he was so paranoid that later in life, as he was getting older, he decided that he wanted to make sure that people would miss him when he was gone. And so he had the most elite citizens of Jerusalem imprisoned and waiting for his death. So when he died, they would be executed, and at least someone would drop a tear for him when it came time of his death. And so, I mean, this is the kind of guy that's in charge here. Now, he was a great builder. He did a lot to improve the area, but unfortunately, it's one of those things where everybody's out to get me. Everything's terrible. I'm just going to make it hard on everybody with that. And so we have this, again, this parallel of Jesus is in a stable. We've got the palace. We've got the helpless baby. We've got the man of power. We've got the man of great compassion in Jesus Christ as he grows up and is old. And Herod is all cruel and violent. And so we have this paradox that we have in this story, where we have the good of all humanity and unfortunately the violence and the difficulty of humanity. So moving then on to the 5th verse here. They told him, he's asked, where is this child? And they said, in Bethlehem of Judea. Now, Bethlehem is only 5 miles away. So another reason for Herod to be very uneasy about this is he says, where is this child? Well, he's right down the street with this. Somewhere in Bethlehem, we're going to find this child. And so that's what's written by the prophets. And so, and you, Bethlehem, this is from the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judea, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel, who is to shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod secretly called all from the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. So he's trying to figure out, okay, who is this child? How old is he? Is this an immediate threat? Is this a longer term threat? But we find these words of prophecy both really in 3 different places in the Old Testament: in Micah, in Samuel, and then also in the Psalms. We have this proclamation that there will be someone coming. There is someone coming that is God's representative. With that. So then Herod secretly called for them to come and find out when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I also may go pay him homage. Nice guy. I want to go and be a part of that. Moving on then to the 9th verse. When they had heard the king, they set out. And there ahead of them went the star that they had seen in the horizon until it stopped over the place where the child was. Now, one of the things that again, it's interesting in the scriptures, we have the stories that we have the information that we're given. What we don't know is the Paul Harvey rest of the story. Were the wise guys the only ones able to see this star? Is this such a miraculous thing that God has done that they are the only ones that can see it? Why can't anybody else find this child? They're 5 miles down the road and this miraculous star is out there. why is it that others can't find him on behalf of Herod? Why can't Herod himself find this child? Some information we don't know, but could it have been others that also see that? So when they saw the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. And again, they're following the star to the place that we find the Holy Child. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then opening their treasure chest, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, and having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another way. It's interesting, in this story, we have the Gentiles who are the first to express joy and celebration because this child has been born. You also notice one of the interesting things is when they arrived at the house, they found Mary, his mother, and the baby child. Where's Joseph at this point? Is he gone to work? Is he just out of the house? Is he not a part of the story? But we do see him reappearing in the 13th verse of this, when Joseph has obviously the vision, the dream that he has, where he is told for the Holy Family, until things get quieted down here, until Herod is gone, you need to be not here. And so they go to Egypt with that. Another difference in the stories. In the Gospel of Luke, they return home to Nazareth. In this story, they go to Egypt initially before they return. So we have this story that's very familiar to us. We hear it every year. It is something that we're familiar with, but we have these questions that go along with it. So what is a magi? A magi, by definition, is a wise man. A wise men. Magi is wise men. Magus is a wise man. So magi is plural. So we know at least there's more than one. More than one wise guy has come with that. We don't know how many. All we know is that. So wise men were skilled in the disciplines of philosophy, medicine, religion, natural science. They also dealt in the mystical world. You'll hear them sometimes talked about as magicians. With that, but they're interpreters of dreams, and also they're astrologists. They keep their eye on the celestial world and try to figure out what's going on with that. And so, where did these wise guys come from? Where did the wise men come from? Well, all the Bible tells us is from the east, and that opens up, everything east from here. So where east from here are we talking about? And we're really not too sure. This could be 400 miles away. It could be 1,600 miles away. We just don't know based on the area in which we're talking about. Persia is usually the area that is talked about the most, and that's around 1,000 miles that they have traveled to be here. And so it's probably not a quick, easy trip with that. It is suggested, at least in Holman's Bible dictionary, that the Magi may have been from Persia, Babylon, or the Arabian Desert. And all of these are areas in which there would have been relationship in history and time with this part of the world. If you remember, the Israelites have been, the Hebrews, the Israel folks have been a part of being in Babylon as well as in Persia, and being away from their home with that. So if the Magi have come from Persia, which is now modern day Iran, it would have been estimated somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,400 miles that they would travel to Bethlehem. And this would have been a travel that would have been challenging at the least. So from Babylon, if they're coming from Babylon or Mesopotamia, you're talking about 600 miles. The Arabian Desert would have been somewhere in the same neighborhood. So in biblical times, if the average person was to walk 6 to 24 miles a day. And that was kind of the average, 6 being very hard, treacherous journey. 24 mean slow, smooth, easy travel with that. So depending upon where they were coming from would depend on how long it would take to get there. To give you some reference, the Pony Express riders in the United States used to travel somewhere around 75 miles a day. And that was express mail that you would have here. And they would change horses every 5 to 20 miles, again, depending upon the terrain in which they had to travel. So it took these guys a long time to get there. This is not a quick trip. It's not like the shepherd's fields that you go to right outside of Bethlehem. Even we could walk easily. It was just, if the traditional site of where the shepherds saw heard the angels, or the multitude of angels with them, it would have been just outside the outskirts. And remember, we're talking about 5 miles from Jerusalem. So we're in that very, very intimate area here. So it wouldn't have taken long to get there. If you're coming 1,600 miles and you're coming over very difficult terrain, it would be a much more difficult trip. I did include a map today to give you a chance to see a little bit here. If you're talking about coming from Babylon, you can see the general area there of how long it would take to be here. And here, the estimate is it would have been 120 days of travel if you were coming from that area with that. And then there's another one that's a little harder to see, but I think, again, gives us the reference. If you're coming from Susa, which is in now Iran, over in that area, you can see how long it would take also to get there. So who were these magi? We don't know definitively who they were or how many there were, as we've said, but tradition has Melchior is coming from Persia, Gaspar from India, Balthazar from Arabia. And these are traditional names. These are traditional guys that have been associated with or linked with this biblical story. We don't know that these are specific guys. We just know by tradition, these are the names that are often talked about. Melchior is an older guy, gray-haired with long beard. And he was the one that by tradition brought the gift of gold. And this is probably in ornamental jewelry in some shape, manner, or form. Many people did not carry back in then what we would call gold bars with them. They would have put it in some form of jewelry, some form of easier use and travel with that. And so they probably brought it in that form. But the importance of that is gold, even back in that time, was an element that was fit for kings. So they're bringing a gift for a king. Gaspar was supposedly younger, beardless, ruddy in his countenance, and he brought the gift of frankincense, which was fit for the priests to be burned in worship. So their intent in coming with this is that they would bring this incense that they had through temple worship. It would have been used, frankincense would have been used, one of those things, a smell that is given to the place of worship. And then Belshazzar is more dark complected, possibly from a portion of the world in which his complexion would have been dark, and he brought the gift of myrrh. And that's used for embalming, a gift fit for a savior with this, the one who is going to give their life for individuals. Now, again, these are the traditional gifts that are given. If you look at the gifts and where they came from in verses 11 and 12, they gave gifts that are basically simple gifts. They're specific gifts given for the one that they come to express their homage to. They're given sacrificially. These are precious gifts. These are not gifts that are given haphazardly. These are very precious, all of them in their own right, very precious in the way that they are presented. They're given of themselves. They come and they kneel down before this baby, this child, in a way that I'm sure they used the protocol that was necessary when they went to visit Herod. But in their focus and their direction is to come and to share as best they can in worship and honor and respect of the Christ child. And then out of that honor and to protect the child, they leave for their own country by another road. They don't do as Herod has asked them to do. And again, that's one of the things that brings down the terrible decree that Herod gives, that all the children below the age of 2 are to be killed and murdered with that. But the Magi's greatest act was that of worship. The highest form of human expression that we can give is to honor and to worship someone or something. And so their worship was in devotion to something greater than themselves. These are the guys that are the most learned in the world, in the culture. These are the guys that would have known everything about everything as best they could. It was a kind of a think tank, if you want to call it that, of people that were higher educated, that had a lot of time to give to that and to give to thought in what it was. And so they come. And so this child is greater than they are, something that was eternal, something that's going to be everlasting, is powerful, is trustworthy. They come as those coming to worship. And so the Magi actually found, I think, these 7 things. First of all, they found the Messiah, the living Son of God, the one that is to be the gift given to the world. They have this most precious gift the world has ever known. It's given to all people. And so they are the ones that have found, along with the shepherds, this individual. They found the Prince of Peace. They find everlasting love in this place. They find the joy of the world. Joy to the world is that hymn we sing every Christmas that expresses again the Lord has come, what joy that has expressed to all of us. They bring eternal hope and for the entire world. It is because of this gift that God has given to us that we are able to see into and live into the future. And also then ultimately we are given the light of the world. And it's we talk about it on Christmas Eve every year. It is that light that pierces all darkness. And it's interesting that even in the darkest of rooms, in the darkest of places, even striking a match pierces that darkness. And so how fortunate we are to have this gift that is given to us. So here are your questions to be used around the table. What did worshiping Jesus involve for the Magi? You know, what is it that they did? What is it they expected? How did they experience their worship there? And how does that influence our understanding of worship today as we come before God, not only in the high holy days, but every day that we come to worship? And what are some of the various presents that we as a community of faith might give Christ? As we look into this year of 2023, what is it that we as a community of faith can share about who and what Christ is to the world? And then what gifts, physical or attitudinal or otherwise, are you planning to give Christ this year in your own personal life? So talk amongst yourselves.
Morning, everybody. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Hey.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Technology. It's
So
working.
Bob, you have something to cheer about?
Don't sit back down so we can see your face, Bob. Oh. You're on mute. That's okay. Christopher, good morning. It is good.
There we go.
It is good to see all of y'all
Good
today.
morning. Happy
Oh,
New Year.
We caught you with the mouthful.
Yeah. And I thought the dogs got lucky until I saw Tulane come back there, Bob.
Skill, not luck.
Yeah, skill. Let's go with that skill. Gentlemen, good morning.
But as John Ray said, that will be the last of the underdogs
The last of the upsets.
beating the favored. We don't want that next Monday.
Yeah, okay. Well, gentlemen, I'm glad most of y'all had a good football New Year's. So,
You're tongue-tied.
I'm tongue-tied. Yeah. So we'll just go straight to the question. So, what did worshiping Jesus involve for the Magi? How does this influence your understanding of worship? Did y'all learn anything new about worshiping Christ?
Well, I do think that one of the things that David stressed that people really don't have a good understanding of is the fact that these guys must have headed out like a half a year before they got to Jerusalem. I mean, this was not a quick trip. I mean, it wasn't like they were just on the road for 2 or 3 days. 120, 140, 50 days it may have taken them to make this journey. So just the act of getting there was an extreme,
Act of worship. Absolutely.
Yes.
It was an effort.
Yes.
It was an effort to seek the Christ child. And I guess it's a journey. So, so I guess in our analogy today, we are all on a journey. And it's probably going to take us our whole lives. So I would add to what David said, not only they're traveling, but it started before then for the Magi because they had to be watching the sky. Not only do they have to be watching the sky to see the star, they had to have been educated as to what the star meant when they saw it, right? Which implies a whole, right? I mean, they probably spent their whole life watching for this, learning about it. I mean, they might have been watching for other things too, but right, it didn't start when the star appeared. It started.
And we watched a movie in Sunday school several years ago, The Star.
Yeah, the Star of Bethlehem.
That talked about what the star really was, and why David asked the question, well, why didn't everybody see this star? And I think if that movie is correct, the reason is because you had to have some pretty significant training in astronomy and astrology to understand the significance of the retrograde motion around Jupiter and all of the things that had to happen in order for the sign to appear.
Yep. So probably everybody saw the star, but a lot of people didn't attach the importance to it that the Magi did. Yeah, that was a good. If y'all haven't seen it, it's called The Star of Bethlehem, and you can find it on YouTube, I think. But some guys got a model. They mathematically model the night sky, and you can see what the night sky would look like from any point on Earth at any time in history. And he runs the model back to the birth of Christ around that time. And so what did the night sky look like, and what star are we looking for? And it's amazing the things he sees. It is, and I will give you the details, but I don't remember it. But it does have to do with retrograde motion, which is an appearance that stars have. Stars actually move backwards. You would think that stars always move from east to west. You know, they rise in the east and set in the west because that's the rotation of the earth. But there is such a thing as retrograde motion where stars move from west to east.
Well, it's actually planets that do the retrograde motion.
Yeah, planets have, so yeah, planets, but they look like stars. Anyways, it is pretty cool.
One of the things that always struck me about this most was that, yes, they were probably astrologers, and there may have been some scientific interest, but I've always thought that they followed that because there was an expectation. There was some hope. They weren't just following this thing in the sky. They felt there was some meaning to it.
Yes.
And if they came from the east, back in Persia or whatever, they were probably Zoroastrians. And that meant that they believed in good and evil. And they saw that as kind of a universal conflict. And so to follow that meant curiosity, but it also meant that hopefulness, that there is something good that's happening, that the universe is talking about, and it gave them some hope to do that. So they didn't just pack up